Hi, everyone. Sorry, we're starting a few minutes late. The quality of life meeting ran a little bit over, and we're just waiting for Amy, who should be joining us shortly, before we get going.
I'm ready.
Hey.
Amy, so do we have a quorum?
I think so. Yeah, we do.
Okay, great. So I'm suggesting for the agenda tonight, we do it how we normally have, which is district manager's report, chair's report, the discussion on any of the various committees that still have yet to meet or any issues, and then new business. And I had said last week that we would discuss under new business the events of the last 10 days, 2 weeks, and go forward from there. Does that sound acceptable to everybody?
Yes.
Everybody's nodding their heads. Okay. Bob, do you want to start things off?
Sure. All right, so I've got just one thing to report on, and that is I reached out to the bids that cover parts of our district and asked them if they could just kind of send me a summary of some of the damage that had happened to the retail properties within their boundaries. And so I just wanted to kind of relay some of the information that I got back from them. The Village Alliance, which of course is along 8th Street from 6th Avenue into CB3, and then from 6th Avenue from West 4th Street to 13th Street, and University Place from Washington Mews up to 13th Street. Village Alliance had 46 incidents of damaged storefronts, not including dozens of graffitied buildings. And most of this information is through June 3rd. It's not up to date. It doesn't have the last few days. The NoHo bid, which is primarily the Broadway and Lafayette corridors from Houston to Astor Place, had 52 incidents of damaged storefronts, including 21 stores that were looted. The Soho Broadway bid, which is primarily Broadway from Canal to Houston, had damage to 37 retail locations. That number does not include damage to office and residential lobbies. 19 stores were looted, and as of last week, 80% of their storefronts were boarded up. The Union Square Partnership, most of which is CB5, but they do have a ban from 6th Avenue to 4th Avenue between 14th and 13th Streets. They had approximately 2 dozen damaged properties, mostly on Broadway, 14th Street, and 5th Avenues. They also reported on quite a bit of damage to city property, including traffic and street signs, light poles, sanitation baskets, Walk NYC kiosks, and trees. The meatpacking bid had damage to, they said, between 15 and 20 storefronts. And lastly, the Hudson Square bid had damage to four storefronts, and 1 property was looted. And that's what I've got so far on that. That's it.
Thanks, Bob. And also, you'd reached out to all 4 of our precincts just today, but we hadn't heard back from them yet.
Right.
Correct?
Well, I reached out to them last night, but have not heard back. That's right.
So we're waiting to hear back from them. Thanks, Bob. As far as the chair's report, the reworking group letter went out after the meeting. It was changed a little bit more to reflect some of the city's proposed legislation, just to updated the language. Bob can send you a copy of that letter. I just wanted to thank the committee and Valerie for their hard work on that throughout the process. As far as we had a couple of, back up for a second. One point that came up during one of the meetings is trying to keep for board members to try and keep their video on as much as possible during the meetings, because the public, when people have their videos turned off, can't see that you're participating in the meetings. And so if people's video is turned off, to public members, it looks like there may only be 3 or 4 committee members or not that many board members in attendance, when in fact, everybody actually is participating. They just have their video off. So that's something that had been raised. We can discuss that more if people want to. And I think that the rest of the notes that I have at this point are more housekeeping with the committees. I was going to start with Susanna. For your meeting, Project Renewal, the new women's shelter on West 11th Street, had requested to come. Are you here, Susanna? Sorry.
Yeah, I'm here. I'm here.
Yeah, so they wanted to come this month, and you had 2 other items on the agenda.
Yeah, I think we can, it sort of depends on whether a lot of people show up to either of these. I mean, if no one does, they're both pretty straightforward and pretty short. So we'll just do that. The original item on our agenda, there's 2 parts of it. One is talking about the outreach program that Greenwich House has finally set up to be able to make contact with all the seniors in our district and beyond, and also re-envisioning what senior centers might be like, because it seems that DFTA was considering a new concept paper to change the way it issues its RFPs before COVID hit. And so this new item is a shelter on West 11th Street that would be a women's homeless shelter. And if they want to present, that's fine. Bob tells me that we don't need a resolution for it.
They may not require one, but I would like to do one, because I
Okay.
think it's important to demonstrate our, our support for that. That's an important component. I think going forward, if any other issues come up with that, just that we acknowledge that we've heard it and that we support it.
Okay.
I had a quick question for you on this. I was looking at it and thinking about the timing. Does Greenwich, how many other senior centers are in CB2 that are not run by Greenwich House?
I'm only aware of the ones that Greenwich House runs. I mean, they have.
Isn't there the old police headquarters? Isn't there a senior center in the basement there?
Which police?
Bob, do you know?
I don't.
Headquarters on Central Street? What?
Yeah,
In
I
where?
think that there used to be. Does anybody know? No.
Pete said yes.
Yes. Okay. So that's
Who
one.
runs that? I've never been aware of it.
I think it's focused on more on the Chinese community. I could be wrong, but it's. I think we should, if we're going to have that discussion, we should really reach out more to make sure we've got all of them and not just Greenwich House.
Yeah, absolutely. I've never known of any senior centers other than the ones that are Greenwich House. So I would love to be enlightened on that. That feels like a failing on our part. On my part.
Yay. A couple more years, you'll know, Suzanne.
Yeah, it's fine.
Just because I think that's it's a really interesting topic, and I'm just reimagining senior centers and what that means. I mean, it's, especially with reopening day today. I mean, I only saw 2 places that were open for curbside delivery, but I just think, I don't know if that's a discussion that, if we could put that off and make sure it was more inclusive and just have Greenwich House.
There's no urgency to it. So if you'd like, we can bump that to July if you'd like. There's no urgency for it. I mean, I doubt that DFTA is I haven't heard from Greenwich House that DFTA is in the process of doing anything right now.
So if we did a presentation by Greenwich House and then Project Renewal's presentation on the Women's Homeless Center, that's probably manageable, even if we do.
Yeah, and you want to we could just do the Greenwich, just the part about their outreach program, and then Project Renewal, and we can bump the other part, the DFTA part, to July. Okay, that's fine. That's a good idea.
Okay.
Carter, I had forgotten about the senior center in Chinatown, but that may be the single biggest senior center actually in our district. So.
Okay. Yeah.
Do you know who runs it? I don't know. I mean, I don't know anything.
I'll send you the contact information.
I have
Great.
the information. It's I think it's the Chinese American Planning Council, and then there's the building inside the police building on Baxter Street that also provides services. There's 2 in Chinatown.
Are you on Oasis? Where are you?
Me?
Are you on Oasis? Yeah, like where you get, yeah.
Where do I get this? I guess there's 4 senior centers.
Okay,
So-
no, I just wondered if you were using Oasis.
No, I
Oasis.
guess I just know about them because
Oh,
they're.
okay.
Yeah,
Great.
I mean, I just knew about it just because I don't know. I just-
Okay.
from the past. Okay, so, and then Janine, the schools and education meeting for tomorrow has been canceled, but you'd like to schedule a separate meeting with a different topic on Wednesday, the 17th, correct?
Yes. And we are finalizing, we'd like to have a meeting to address, how to talk to your kids about racism and really the what can you do, which is discussing ways to reduce systematic racism in our public schools. And we're sort of forming a list, but we have like 6 different items on that list, 3 of which we've already addressed, but culturally responsive sustaining education, which the city has a definition of, but the question is, where's the funding coming from to actually implement that? Implicit bias training, which would fall under that, and how does that include microaggressions that may be occurring at schools, defunding NYPD in our public schools, hiring a diverse teaching staff, which we passed a resolution on that in January. I guess the additional the state didn't give them additional funding, but didn't cut them in the March 31 budget. And what we've also passed a resolution on is funding scientifically proven reading and writing curriculum, which is, basically students who are not getting the right curriculum, and there's a big correlation between poverty and race fall through the cracks, and we've addressed that in several resolutions. And we are going to have tentatively the Manhattan Superintendent Marisol Rosales and a clinical person from her staff, and Akila Askley, who is a CB2 member, but she's also a clinical psychologist, has also agreed to be sort of an expert speaker on this as well.
Great, that sounds good. And that's so, and just as we had talked about, so you're planning on having a resolution for that. You'll have a
Yes,
fairly
we
short
would.
turnaround. So if board members are interested in that, it's going to come out later on Thursday afternoon, just so you guys have it, make sure you review it beforehand. And then SLA licensing is also meeting this week. And Bob and Donna, you guys had a discussion on the new legislation. Is that something that you anticipate there being discussion on at the full board meeting?
Well, if people want to speak on it, the only people that spoke on it are against it. So you'll get just generally that. Most people are against it. We really haven't gotten an email, a positive email. So we get lots of emails, and a lot of people showed up, and each and every one was against the law as it was. A lot of pitfalls in it. So we're going to write a resolution. Given the different alternatives to the legislation that we think might make sense.
Yeah, because I just want to make sure that everybody on the board has a chance to read it before the meeting. So if there is any discussion, people have had a chance to read it. So.
Okay.
Okay. And then Chenault, you've got a couple of items coming up.
Like that?
Neither is terribly involved or complicated. We continue. Process seems to be moving slowly for people.
Do you have you talked to anybody, or Bob, do you know, is there any anticipated movement at landmarks, land use, city agencies?
I have not heard anything or seen anything.
Landmarks continues to meet and do their things in a rather normal seemingly way.
Land use continues to not do their thing.
Right. I'm just wondering, just if July and August are suddenly going to be very active.
August is typically active for us, for people preparing for autumn construction. Um,
And it's just
I
as
don't
I've
know.
said before, you know, if just so board members are aware, I mean, we may have, you know, for a lot of our committees that meet responding to applications, we may be a little bit busier this summer than usual, but that's on the optimistic side. So
It's actually very nice with the not to summon everybody for two relatively small things that have to make the journey. They just click on for half an hour and we're done.
that
It's
is
an advantage on this side.
that is true too. And then and Janet, for how's your guys panel for economic development?
Trying to get my video back, sorry. We got a nice cross section. We have David Reese from 10,000 Things that has a small store plus online and deals with whole, has outlets and department stores. We've got Jonathan Adler, who obviously a national retailer. They're going to talk about, they've got a whole sorts of new guidelines for opening. Scott from the committee is going to talk about, address restaurants. We have another woman, Judy, and I'm forgetting her last name, who also has a similar business to 10,000 Things with an online and a local retailer. And then another woman, Suwana, which Dan just made contact with today. So she wants to speak, and I don't really know all of her details yet. But so hopefully we'll have a good discussion. And then the point is, once we hear from them, perhaps there'll be 2 or 3 issues that sort of float to the top that we can, take up in the future. But to just get a good cross section of what people are thinking and the steps.
Yeah, so it's Daniel. Can you hear me?
Yes.
It's Suwana Perry. She's an African-American young. She has an online business. It's e-com, and she opened up the business on Den of Thieves right off LinkedIn 6. I think it's important to have her viewpoint. And she was one of the original panelists.
Yeah, are any of the other original panelists, do we reach out to them? Are they interested? Because it got really...
Yeah, the woman, Judy, new day, new time, new world. But Judy served on the panel before, so we have 2 people who were on the panel from the last time.
Jill Stein, also from John Hardy, is on the panel.
Okay, great. And I think those are the rest of the committees that are meeting this month. That's here. Okay, did any other committees have anything they want to report on? I take it that's a silence. Okay.
Yeah.
We have quality of life just met, and
Yes. Yeah.
it went well.
Okay.
Sorry to go over, everyone. Sorry to go over.
Yeah, and that's just illustrates the problem that we can only have one meeting occurring at a time. So it's a little challenge, and Bob and I were just talking about this, just with scheduling meetings through the course of the month. In the past, we have 2 meetings on an evening, and so when all the committees are meeting, it's much easier to do. But when we're meeting this way, we're only able to have 1 committee meeting at a time. So it has little challenges when we try to tack on a meeting before, like tonight with quality of life. All right, so with that, I'm gonna move on to everything that's been happening of late. The statement that I've said at a few of our meetings now, which I hope encompasses everybody's viewpoints, but it's the statement that I've been meeting, and I'll just try to recreate it from my notes. I've said it a little bit differently each time, but it said, we're outraged at the death of George Floyd, the systemic racism enshrined in our laws and policies, the disproportionate impact the pandemic has had on our Black and Brown communities. We support the peaceful message of all protesters, the right of peaceful assembly and free speech. However, we are very concerned for our residents and neighbors. Order needs to be restored to our community. And that's obviously from last week and not this week, but that's just the message that I've put forward before a couple of meetings. So I just wanted to start off with that. And I think that everybody here has a lot of thoughts. I think that most of us, I would hope, are in the same place on this, and it's just a question of having a discussion so we can better understand each other through this. And I don't think that I've tried to encourage board members to talk to each other, have conversations. It's really the best way to start, anything is just in person-to-person conversations. I've run into a few board members in the last few days, and face-to-face is really something you don't realize how much you miss until you actually talk to somebody in person, and what a difference that makes. And so I think it's talking about this on Zoom, on video, is definitely a challenge, but it's what we have, and I think that we should all start having those conversations. And so I guess I'll just start off with that. I'm sure people have things to say. Hopefully we can all be respectful of each other. And we had just gone through our, for most of us or many of us have gone through training session with Hannah. I hope that everybody can keep everything that we discussed there and keep it in mind, as we go forward with these discussions. I think we've all, as much as we're similar in many ways, I think that in the last 2 weeks, or since last Thursday, or when the different, whenever the going back to the beginning is when George Floyd was murdered, and sort of as that emerged and all the different conversations that came up and our experiences here in New York, everybody on the board has had a different experience by virtue of where you live, each block that you're on, where you were in the past 10 days, what you witnessed, what you walked out to see. And I think that that's the part that everybody needs to talk about to come to a place where we can have better conversations, because there's very powerful experiences across the board, positive, negative, everything in between. So with that, as all of you know, I generally don't limit people in their time in discussion, but I'm hoping that people can be respectful of each other's time so that everybody has a chance to speak if they'd like to. Anybody? I see Susanna, you have your...
Well, I agree with everybody in the entire zeitgeist about, how horrible this is and how it's ridiculous that this is not been solved in our country yet, and all that kind of stuff. From a very micro perspective, I would be really interested to know how the officers at our local precincts feel about this. I feel that actually they have been, for obvious reasons, not included in the conversation, but we've had strong relationships with our precincts, and I would be interested to hear what they have to say. I mean, my feeling about all of this is, bad cops make good cops look bad, and we have, good officers as well, and we rely on them. So I would just have found myself wanting to know what they think about it and what they think about cops being bad. That's my feeling.
Thank you, Susanna. David.
Sorry. I have been speaking to people at the 6th Precinct. I overlook 6th Avenue, which is like the Mississippi River in terms of protest. We have groups coming up 6th Avenue, going down 6th Avenue. The attitude of people, first of all, I just want to say I'm very proud of New York, is that the steam is still in everybody's engine and they're still protesting. I think it just makes me so proud. I'm against defunding the police. I think this is a large, complex city. Our precinct, just talking about our precinct, I think has been very good. Police do need some retraining. I think there's a lot of bad actors on the police force. I've had my own experiences with that, but by and large, fully, our police protect us. They're there when we need them. I am totally against defunding them. I am for taking some of the funding and having no nonsense re-education and training for the police force. So I think that Corey's office was angry that so many of people signed it who worked under him this letter to defund the police. I think it's short-sighted, and I'm against it. I don't know that we need to dive into it or not, but just talking to my neighbors and talking to my friends, talking to the board members, it's something I wanted to lay out. We may be losing, as you know, Jimmy Apparisi, who is one of the truly great guys on 6th Precinct. He's still thinking about it. There's a lot of rumors that the police commissioner is going to resign soon. There's swirling rumors about that, which I think would be a good first step in reforming some police practices. I think he did not handle the situation well at all. That's all I got to say. And I don't know how people feel about defunding the police, but I'm not for it.
And I just, you know, I've got
Well, I got a thumbs up or a thumbs down, Suzanne. Are you agreeing with me or disagreeing?
I agree with you. I don't understand the relationship between defunding the police and police brutality. I'm not saying that it doesn't exist, but I don't understand what that connection is. If anything, I would want more funding to for better recruitment, better training, better enforcement of, you know, when people act poorly. But I think also that, you know, scolding and being angry makes a lot of sense, but ultimately there's a kind of granular psychological thing that has to happen, and I feel that that would be money well spent. I don't see why, you know, I don't think that dismantling, you know, removing the funding for body cameras or something is necessarily a good idea. That's what it seems.
I want to say, parents.
David, I just want to say something to you that's not a sentiment, just to make sure our precincts were not here for us, and we're not here for our community on Saturday night, on Sunday night, and Monday night.
Our precinct, or are you talking about
our precincts were not here for us on Saturday night, Sunday night, and Monday night. They were not here, David. There's no defense. They were not here.
It was rough. It was rough.
Okay. Do you want to elaborate on that? Or?
I think that Bob did when he read out the numbers that just came from our bids, so the number of damaged storefronts. And people live in those buildings, in many of them, above them. And I just saying that because that's something for people to keep in mind that's different from the protesting, but that's the perspective of people who live in those buildings. The calls that I got and what I personally saw, it's just.
So people who were calling the 6th Precinct, you're saying, and they were not responding? I just wondering.
The 1st, 5th, 6th, and 9th.
Okay. I mean, I'm just wondering how much of 6th Precinct were calling the shots. I thought.
They weren't there on Broadway. So but let's move on to other people.
We're on 14.
Yeah, we're on 14th. Janine?
Sorry, unmute myself. I mean, I think we can parse this a little bit. I'm a lifelong Catholic. I still occasionally go to church, but I'm opposed to, you know, sexual abuse by priests in the Catholic Church. So you can be opposed to police brutality without worrying about offending the entire entity, because I agree there are good cops and there are bad cops. And in terms of defunding, I am not an expert on the budget. I'm not an expert on the NYPD budget or their operations, but they do have a $6 billion budget, and schools are potentially looking at a 20% cut in their overall budget. So, you know, lots of entities are looking at massive cuts. So I'm not suggesting that. I don't have enough recommendations about where money could be cut or should be cut. But I think I think I can make a good case that educating the future adults of our city is a top priority. And when a lot of, and Amy can probably comment on this, but many social services agencies are asking for a shift of $1 billion of NYPD funds. And this is obviously something we don't have a position on as a board, but a shift from the NYPD to social services agencies. And some of those activities and services being provided by non-NYPD personnel. So it's not necessarily eliminating services, but shifting who's providing them. I just want to point that out.
I mean, if I could just elaborate on what Ginny was saying, I do know, and if we did come to any resolutions, I'd recuse myself. Our organization was one of the ones that signed with over 120 nonprofits, conservative leaning nonprofits, liberal leaning nonprofits, asking for 16% of the police budget to be transferred over to social services. And because, you know, one of the things I believe, just from my reading, is that police are not trained, have been asked to do things that would not traditionally under a part of police officers' jobs. And that is sometimes, not always, I don't want to get into the whole thing, but having them in schools when they're being called in to break up normal kids' fights and the children become criminalized and go into the juvenile justice system. These kinds of things, I think that's a lot to ask of the police, and I believe, and my organization believes, that those kinds of activities do not have to live in the police department. And in fact, until just a few years ago, they didn't. The DOE had its own force that were not associated with the police that handled those kinds of things. So I do believe, I am not saying necessarily yes or no. I'm not going to talk about my personal feelings. I'm just talking about what I'm doing professionally. I do believe that the police department can take a 16% hit when NYCHA is taking a 40% hit. The education department is taking a 20% hit. And if you look back at the redistribution of funds in the budget from the 1970s and the 2008 recession, all the departments that related to human services were cut at extraordinary amounts compared to other departments, including the police department. The police department has grown by billions of dollars under the de Blasio. He's made it larger than ever. So I understand this is a complex issue and different people will have different points of view, but I do support transferring funds for functions that I do not think belong under the police department to human services agencies who are the ones embedded in the community, who are better equipped to handle mental health issues and other kinds of things.
I want to agree with what you're saying, Amy. I don't think the police should be anywhere near our schools. And when I say defund, not for defunding it, I think across the board, I think they should be, their budget should reflect, just let me finish, Carter, their budgets should reflect, you know, what other agencies are being cut as well, but we shouldn't excessively defund the police to an extent that people are calling for. But I agree, they have no place in our schools.
Just if we can just have everybody go in the order that they're called, and after everybody has spoken, I can call on people again. I think it's important to hear everybody.
Sorry about that.
Here, Susan?
Thank you. You know, at the start of this conversation, the first thing we all have to recognize is that the term defunding has not been defined. And it is very easy for each of us to apply an assumption of what that means. And that can be dangerous. If, you know, I think the idea of completely eliminating a police force is an extreme view. It's not something that most people, I know I don't agree with. I think the better way to look at it is better allocation of the resources. Specifically, when we're dealing, if we can identify that there's a portion of the police department's budget that is there to handle things that the police are not particularly qualified to do, then it's not so much about diminishing the police force, it's enhancing those social services or other resources that best satisfy the needs of the communities. It's not about, you know, attacking the police. It's about simplifying what they do in a sense. And yet at the same time, there also has to be a change in the culture, because right now it is cops that want to do the right thing are threatened if they step forward and acknowledge the problems themselves. Everything is coming from the outside, and we're watching police department after police department basically circling the wagons. And we can find help from within as well, but it's got to be a non-hostile way of looking at it. So that was just my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thanks, Susan. Brian?
All right, thank you. Just an anecdote. Last night, my wife and I were walking around our neighborhood and wanted to walk up Charles Street, and that was barricaded because the police station, 6th precinct, is on that street. The barricades were manned by FBI women, and the excuse of barricading the street was that, well, there's a police station there. I just thought it was very particular that the FBI needed to be called in order to support the 6th precinct barricades. Having visited Ireland not too long ago, every police station was behind solid fortress walls and razor blade wires. So I think the point is, we have become, our police departments have become militarized. And I think that if there is some defunding, it would be that we don't make these into armed forces and all of the military equipment that they have been supplied with for a number of years. Otherwise, I think that, yeah, the definition of defunding it has to be defined. And I think the allocation of funds is the point that Susan and David have made, is they shouldn't be in schools. They shouldn't be handling social service issues. Certainly the prisons have been tasked with that as well. Mentally ill people are no longer being treated appropriately. They're sent to jail where they are just terribly mistreated. So it really is a poor appropriation of services and loading it on police where it doesn't belong. So I think that's all I have. Thank you.
Yeah, Brian, I walked by the precinct also, or actually rode my bike and witnessed the same thing. It has happened anytime there's any type of unrest in any precincts that are in the vicinity of late, in the last 5 to 8 years, I think. But it's not great when they tell you can't go down the street. I mean, that was my experience. It doesn't feel particularly good when we live in the community. And it's also, you know, the other thing I was just thinking of that I had wanted to mention before, it's what we've seen has been the antithesis of community policing. And the reason that we have good relationships with our precincts is because of community policing. But why can't the spirit of that continue into the larger elements that would echo our positive local experiences, you know, prior to all this happening? Coral?
Thanks, Carter. So I wanted to make a point of something you said earlier, Carter, and I think, so first of all, as an overlay, I definitely am not supportive of any language on any side that is negative. I think our role as a community board is to help find a way forward that's productive and that we can actually contribute on all sides. And so words like defund, I just don't think really work very well. My understanding is that the police departments were given direct orders by the mayor in numbers. So 4,000 officers and 8,000 officers, they were under-resourced. So yes, they failed us, but that's a management. That's not like the officer at the first precinct decided to go home and not take care of us. That's because the mayor made a bad call and the police chief made a bad call, and they were not prepared. Now, since those first few nights, which were really bad and were terrible in Soho, the neighborhood coordination officers have been unbelievably responsive. In fact, when I made my screen dark just a few minutes ago and I started this, is because he just called me literally tonight while we're doing this call, Officer Erdman. So, and what he was calling was to try and figure out a way that they don't have a way right now within the police force to update the community directly. And so to try and figure out like a third party way to do that. So for us to figure out like how can they do that so that we can get more, we have a lot of local residents that are very unnerved because they, in some cases, called 911 on a night and no one responded in a timely fashion. And although that's not happened the last few nights and we are in a very different place now, that feeling of insecurity has been pretty strong. And it's gonna, it's resulting in hundreds of emails and calls to their precinct and a lot of requests for what may be maybe a little bit more protection than we need at this point. I'm not sure, I'm not but in any event, I think none of us would pretend to be like the ones that can take any agency budget right now and go through with surgical precision on what is the best way to allocate. That is their job. But I think we can give a very clear sort of summary of what we would like to see. We'd like to see, clearly, as Janine's mentioned, counselors in schools. That could be a way. I mean, there's lots of recommendations I think we could make to help any process. And I can't imagine that the governor and the mayor are not asking the police to come forward with how, and I understand they're doing 12-hour days and they're, fully deployed and the FBI is, guarding the precinct. So who's doing this right now? I don't know. But I mean, certainly they're going to be asked for how are you going to make the changes that are needed to make, this force the best it can be. And I think we have a role in trying to come up with what we think, how the community can work better with the police. And I mean, it's true, like who goes to the precinct meetings? Maybe a few of you all have gone. I have never gone. I've lived here over 20 years. I have never gone to a precinct meeting, ever. So, I don't mind. In fact, I'm very happy when I speak to this officer now, but I've never done it before. So finding ways that we can efficiently do that without just inundating in crisis moments and having an ongoing relationship would be better. And it probably would be better for every community. So I guess my overall thing is I feel like they were held back from being there when we needed them. So I'm not resentful about it. I think that was a very poor management call and I hold the mayor totally responsible for that. And that's just my view. Thanks.
Thanks. Amy, did you have more that you wanted to add?
I mean, I would just say personally, and I hope this is taken in the spirit that I'm saying it to not be critical of anyone, but I would respectfully disagree, Coral. I think that this is a time when people have to speak plainly and openly about what I believe is going on in this country and has for 400 years, that there's institutionalized racism, that this is not a coincidence, that we see Black Americans who in the large part have the lowest wage jobs, that we see so many things. And so I want to work the police. I want to find the best cops. I want to believe that all of them or most of them have the best intentions. But I do believe that there is a systemic approach that has benefited white people for 400 years and that it will take strong words and strong action to dismantle that. It's going to take a long time to do it, but I think I see it in our neighborhood, on our CB2 area all the time. I see things that go on, and that's how I feel.
No, I totally agree with you. So we're not on a different page on that at all. I just would say, like, somebody's today said to me, why doesn't every community board member on your community board find 3 people of color to take their place or to join our community board? I heard that and I was like, they weren't being hostile. They were just making a point. And look at it. We have 50 members and, look at us. So that's a good way to change. Thank you. I mean, I'm Mexican American, but do I count? I don't know. I mean, am I in the statistics? I don't know. Like how many of us, I mean, just there's some that we can all figure out a way to incorporate this. And I totally agree. I grew up in Dallas, Texas as a Mexican American. I totally get it. And I totally agree with you. I also want to find a way that we can, do it I guess I'm ready to shift from outrage because everyone's outraged and find tactical ways where we can have an impact and literally feel like, even as a community board, that we have contributed to the solution and we can see that in the months to come, not in years to come. So I agree with you. I'm not disagreeing at all.
Thanks. Chenault?
To your point earlier about the places where the destruction happened, it's well worth reading the beginning of Sean's current letter for the, it's called Soho Alliance, the current newsletter.
Yeah.
It's a very straightforward review of what happened in Soho and speaks well about it's not the stores and the Bloomingdales that are being hurt, it's the people who live there who are not all living in Murdoch's old apartment.
Yeah, it was published in the New York Post, and I can send it around if anyone didn't see it.
I would say otherwise. I grew up in the absolutely segregated South, and I'm old enough to have finished high school before there was any hint that one might ever change anything. And then I've spent most of my career with the Alvin Ailey Company, where I was very much a minority and very much a complete member of the family. So I take it personally when any of this happens. And I take it personally when there's destruction and I see who's doing it. And I feel like those people belong to me in a certain sense that I belong to them. And it's always very difficult for us. It's been interesting talking to from the company, Will, because they're in the really privileged group. They're artists, they're well trained, they're well paid, they're secure in their work and everything. And they're able to have a certain influence because of who they are. And they are very much and very strongly working on how to make things better.
Thank you, Chenault. Matt.
Hey, everybody. So I think like a lot of people, I don't know, I've spent, and some people have had to hear me talking on the phone. I just have to spent the past 10, 12, 14 days so angry I could cry, so sad I could cry. I mean, this is heartbreaking for me as an American citizen. I mean, earnestly heartbreaking. You have obviously like an incredibly multivariate problem. So you have systemic racism, which is so undeniable in every aspect of every part of every day that it befuddles me sometimes when people don't see it. But I get it. Some people don't see it, and I'm not going to opine on that because I for the moment, I think on that topic, white men need to sit down and just listen for a little bit, just hear what has to be said. But I know that I support a very strong statement. I mean, I don't think this is going to surprise anybody. A very strong statement. Enumerating not only that Black Lives Matter, but that we have had, whether implicit or explicit, a part of this, that we own some of this, that we can make changes that impact this, such as increasing diversity on the board, such as ensuring, equity and equality among applicants. There are ways very local that we can change, that we can make changes. But then I saw a group of people walk into the streets and say, we need reform in how communities of color are policed. And I saw a police department say, you want to see reform, we'll give you reform. And I saw with my eyes, I mean, there are videos of it too, some of the most egregious acts that I mean, I have had my worldview changed in 14 days. I was the person who defended the police in these rooms. I was the person who stood up for them. I was the person in high school talking about Police Day, and I was lying through my teeth. What we saw in New York was unacceptable by the New York City Police Department, unacceptable. It is an outrage that that occurred here. I want their pensions personally. Now, I will eventually stop being this angry and I will start having more rational ideas, but I hope everybody can understand how angry I am. I can't imagine how angry the communities of color are around us, because it was staring at us for a very long time and we had the opportunity to do something about it, and we haven't yet. We haven't yet. So we have a twofold failure of the New York City Police Department. Not only did they completely leave the homeland open, and I agree with Coral, I think that was probably a strategic, a command decision. And I don't particularly blame the cops on the street for what happened in the 6, but or the 5 or the 1, the 9, but I certainly blame them for what happened at marches. I blame them for what happened in Brooklyn. I blame them for, those are individual human beings making a decision to do something. They are my friends in some cases. But if we don't speak up, if we don't say this is absolutely unacceptable, I don't know who we are as a city. And I know if more people spoke up when the time was needed, I would have more relatives. I know a lot of other people would have more relatives. This is a time for us to stand up. And so, I don't know, I thank you guys for all the work you're doing here and elsewhere, but that's all I got to say.
Thanks, Matt. Michael.
Yes, thank you, Carter. I'm concerned about how we can effectuate change, and I agree with Carter's opening remarks that our precincts were not there for us during the worst days last week when I tried to describe to friends who do not live in Greenwich Village or Soho or NoHo or any of the areas surrounding us. They said, what price are you paying for a few small streets in Greenwich Village for a major issue? It was so difficult to explain to people what was happening. And they said, why aren't you working with your local precincts? And I tried to explain to them, our local precincts simply aren't with us during these few days of crisis. Fortunately, the past 2 nights have been a lot better. There is less protesting in the street, less police brutality, and of course, far less looting. My question to this board and to our chairperson and to everyone who's part of this conversation is, how do we effectuate change? And I think that using words like defunding the police department is not what we're looking at. We're looking at reallocation of resources. If I can be practical for a moment and we look at the budget process, we have a city budget that will be adopted that has already allocated funding for a variety of agencies and services. What role, and I pose this as an open question, what role could this community board play now, not at some point in the future, but immediately in seeking a reallocation of the appropriate funding that should not be given to the police department, but that should go to schools and should go to social services? How do we make that work at this point in time during the city's current crisis and during the city's budget process? I leave that as an open question. What is our best insertion point to see to it that change happens?
Thank you, Michael. Susan. Susan, are you there? I think you're muted.
Are you talking to me?
No, Susan Wittenberg.
Oh,
I unmuted. Is that okay?
Yep.
Good. Sorry. Hi, hello, everyone. I'm sorry I missed what Coral was saying, and I lost sound then. But I just wanted to say, as someone who was there, you know, in a building watching from my window when the looting was happening for 3 nights, I feel. I heard someone mention the article that Sean wrote in the for the newspaper. I just feel so strongly that he is. It's just not the voice of our community, and you know, we've been dealing with this since the beginning of the COVID crisis when he got 150 people supposedly to write letters saying they didn't want open streets in our neighborhood, when I said at the time I felt like those 150 people weren't even in the neighborhood, and it was so out of touch with what was happening. And you know, that to see that as our voice when it was really like rambling on about his own personal life story as an activist seemed just so tone deaf again about what was happening. And we do in our tiny neighborhood, and I appreciate, Matt, you know, you're new to activism, but you know, in our tiny neighborhood, we've lived in both. And I don't want us to be overshadowed by the looting, even though that was something all of us will never forget. I really speak out and have a position now. And I was, as a rep on the Broadway bid board, I was in on that meeting last week, and it was interesting hearing them because, you know, as a business representatives of the business community plus some residents, they are trying to stake out very strong positions about how we go forward here. And I think I agree that it's something we need to think strongly about. And you know, not only am I one of the people who looked out of the window and saw what happened, but I live in an office building, you know, where normally 450 people work, and who knows how many people are going to come back. And so, you know, and the thing about the stores being looted in Soho, before they were looted, I felt like we had really bird's eye view of what was going on, not only in this country for the economic impact of COVID, but globally, because these are global businesses that were shut down. And I just feel like it impacts so many things that we've been dealing with in the past year, you know, looking closely even at the Envision Soho NoHo. I mean, how is that going to be impacted by all of this? And so I'm agreeing with we need to have a strong point of view about this. But many of us have been, you know, activists for decades and not new activists. And I think, you know, now's our moment to really come up with a strong position, because we have found ourselves at the epicenter, not of COVID really, because we've had very low numbers, but of what happened, you know, with the looting in last week. So I'm not offering exactly a suggestion. I just wanted to be sure that our neighborhood was not represented by Sean's article.
Carter, you muted.
Carter, did you mute me again? Sorry.
Sorry, did you say Betty?
Yes, Betty.
Okay, got it. Sorry. Yeah, I think this is obviously a super difficult issue to approach because it's our community that is, you know, being the sort of like subjected to the violent protests. I personally have I have a lot of empathy for the protesters, and I myself have been protesting, and I think I've not been looting or rioting in any sort of violent way, but I think that this is sort of, I mean, no one in their right mind can deny the systemic racism that's existed in this country for so long. And I think that obviously George Floyd was the most recent in a long history of violent murders of Black men and women at the hands of the police. But I think that this sort of turning point, I agree with what Susan was saying. I think that while we should be empathetic to the businesses and the people in our community, that this is a larger movement, and this is a moment in history that is going to be a in my opinion, obviously I'm young, but that is going to be a turning point for our country and civil rights in our country and human rights in our country. And I think that being in New York City, which is a largely liberal city and being in our community specifically, that it's important that we put ourselves on the right side of that history. And I think that obviously, I'm not saying that we like condone looting or that we condone violence, but I agree. I live right south of Union Square, and I've seen the violence that police officers have been inflicting against protesters who were not violent until the police arrived. I've seen rubber bullets being shot at protesters who were not doing anything except being loud. This was before the curfew was instituted, so they also weren't in violation of curfew. And I think, again, I'll reiterate one more time, it's a difficult issue to approach, but it's something that I think it's important that we do take a stance on, and that stance takes into account the history of our country. And obviously, I personally and many members of this board do feel like the police keeps our community safe and feel like they're our advocates. But I think there's people in our community and outside of our community that don't feel that way. And I think that we shouldn't automatically defer to giving our support to the police in this moment. Not that that's necessarily what people were suggesting, but yeah, I think that we should really take into account the importance of this moment and the real messaging besides the protests, and not focus only in on the violence, because that's really just a small sect of a larger movement that I think is very noble in cause and important for us to support.
Thank you, Betty. Ritu?
Thanks. I have to say that I'm super impressed with the comments that you all have made so far. My personal perspective is that this is a very important time in history, and we have an opportunity to make our voices heard and to stand on the right side of history. This is a pivotal point, not just in race relations, but what has really become obvious over the last several months is the relative inequality within the country. And that as we move forward, it always calls for a course correction, no matter who you are or what goals you're headed towards. And while New York as a city really pulled together after 9/11 and pulled together in many ways during several crises, whether it was a hurricane and others, I think right now history is calling on us to do a course correction and to look at the ways that we would advocate for change, whether it is a reallocation of the budget for the police from the 9/11 days to one that is more sensible and reallocates responsibilities to other agencies, whether it is about what we will find acceptable in leadership at the city level or with the commissioner or with the PBA, and to basically voice that advocacy loudly and clearly. And the more voices that we can collectivize, I think the more powerful it can be. And so if there was ever a time to make a collective statement, it's now. And one of the things that I've been heartened by is that, I am the CEO of a medium-sized company, and I have been pleasantly surprised at the outpouring and the strongly worded statements of various corporate leaders throughout the country and throughout the world. And so I think we should take hope from that this is not just an activist issue or a youth issue or an African-American issue, that this has really perhaps opened the eyes of different types of people across the board. And I would just really welcome the opportunity for this board to also add to those voices in a concrete way. That's it.
Thanks, Ritu. Valerie?
Thanks.
So I have 4 quick points I'd like to make. One is regarding, there was a comment about, and Brian had put this in the chat as well, about replacing ourselves with people with color. And I would say to that, as a woman of color who tends to present as white in a lot of situations to people, that people don't realize that I am a woman of color, I am Mexican American. I would say be careful with that. I also don't believe in quotas as a woman of color to fit a quota. And then I'd say on the other side of that, it's more than just race, it's also age, as well as housing diversity. If you look at the data from the Manhattan Borough President's Office, that the city did a whole article on it a few months ago. They said that what community boards in Manhattan need is more young Hispanic renters, which is myself. So that's just kind of a point there. And then I want to make a point on, it sounds like that we all agree that we want to call this a redistribution. And the figure that Amy had given is a 16% reduction of the $6 billion NYPD budget, which is about $960 million. So I just thought it was important to have that number just as a talking point. And then 3, you know, we have 4 police precincts that are within our district. So we have the 1st, the 5th, the 6th, and the 9th. And so how do we find a solution where the board is able to sustain, and you know, I know Carter at the top of the hour had said that they had let us down. So how do we move forward with them, knowing that we have to have this kind of long-term relationship? Is it asking for a demilitarization? And I know there was comments of not wanting to use negative words, but I'm just kind of throwing that in there as a thought. You know, there's another board, there's another Manhattan board that got called out for white privilege for, in the same meeting, asking for certain things against the NYPD, and then in that same meeting asking for more NYPD support. So I really urge us as a board to think long and hard of how we communicate this message. I agree it's important, and I am against systemic racism, but I do want to make sure that we're all thinking not just in the short term, but also in that long-term relationship that we need to have. Thank you.
Thanks, Valerie. Coral, you've already had a chance to speak, and I'm just going to go and just see if a few other people haven't. William?
Yeah, hi everybody. I just wanted to chime in because, you know, obviously we've all been talking about, you know, the very difficult couple of weeks and months that we've all had to go through. And I just wanted to share an experience that I had this weekend that, you know, was a bit of a positive, I guess, experience that I would say, you know, which is nice in the midst of everything we've been going through. But, you know, Saturday, I got up, walked out. I live between 5th and 6th Avenue on 10th Street, walked out to 5th Avenue to see a crowd of thousands of people, you know, extending all the way back to 10th Street. And it was people peacefully protesting, people all wearing masks, people giving out free water, food, singing songs, holding signs. And, you know, for me, for someone who's, you know, only been living here for 10 years, you know, it reminded me of moments that I'd read about happening back in the 50s and 60s in Washington Square Park. And the types of protests that, you know, our neighborhood has always been a center for a really long time, you know, that I never had the chance to experience. So seeing that kind of gathering there, peacefully advocating for change in such a historic place kind of really brought, you know, chills to myself. And I thought it was, you know, it did evoke a historic moment for me, as many other people have alluded to. So I don't know if positive is the right word, but, you know, it was an experience for me that I thought was a really, you know, memorable experience.
Thanks, William. Let's see, I was just looking to see who has not spoken yet. Janet, I don't think you've spoken yet, correct?
Yeah, and I just want to, you know, Ritu mentioned, one, I don't know how as a board we can actually come together on a statement. It's not as if we have a, you know, a CEO and 10 people, so that'll be an issue. But, you know, there's obviously structural racism, but there's also an issue here, you know, that Ritu touched on of, you know, economic inequality, and that our country has obviously the rich are up here and the poor are up here. So this is not going to be a popular statement. So we love saying, oh, the protesters are so wonderful and peaceful, and then they're the looters. So it's very important to recognize there is a reason people are angry. So that, yes, you know, property destruction, we can say, you know, is bad, but don't just dismiss it offhand without thinking about the why. You know, people are unemployed, they don't have access to goods, we're incredibly consumer society. So just be cognizant that it's not, it's not without, it has its, what's motivating some of that. And I don't know how we address that, but I just wanted to say that. And there's been some very good people talking about that issue.
Thanks, Sarah. And I think so most of the people here have spoken.
Yeah.
And is there
Hello?
anybody else who wants to jump in who has not yet spoken before?
Yes, this is Ed Ma.
Ed, go ahead, Ed.
Yes, I'm so glad I heard the real true voice, such like Jeanette, Valerie, and Rachel. And I'm quite support three of them. But I myself like to say something I want to say many times just before former president, since I want to say is just trying to restore the public health committee of environment, public health, and the public safety. Because I have tried to talk with the 2 or 3 former presidents before, they never listened. But I talk to you, Carter. I hope this restore the committee of environment, public health, and the public safety, such like this time the coronavirus. And it's really public health and the public safety. And of course, also the environmental change, climate change is very, very important. And we have to be honest to ourselves, local environment, you know, and because I think Joe Gallagher doing excellent about this street situation. But we still need public health, public safety, and the environment issue, so can protect the CB2 community. So this is what I'm trying to take this chance to voice my opinion. And really, this something to do with to speak the truth, what I feel for this community board too. Thank you.
Thanks, Ed. Is there anybody else who hasn't spoken who'd like to speak? Let me see hands up. Okay, back to you, Coral.
Thanks. So I was thinking maybe it would be interesting because, you know, Stringer actually, I was looking online, he published a couple days ago the $1.1 billion suggestions to cut or to redistribute funding from NYPD. And so I'd be interested in finding out what the NYPD's view is on his recommendations. And if, you know, both felt like that's doable, then that could be something that's actually, because I mean, I'm not going to pretend that we can give money recommendations on a budget that we're not experts in. I just don't think that's a responsible thing to do. But if the comptroller is making suggestions that NYPD then is also reviewing and they feel like they can do these things, I would support supporting the comptroller's suggestions and doing that. And it's 1.1 billion. It's not a small amount. And he has very concrete ways I can send. I found the article, it's on his website, comptroller.nyc.gov. And it lays out a specific roadmap for it. So, I mean, he's done the work. He's the comptroller of the city, and he's made a suggestion. And I'd like to, maybe we should all review it and read it and see how we feel about it. And if we feel like we can endorse it and, you know, NYPD feels like it can do it, that could be a step forward that's actually working in the process. It's just a suggestion.
I mean, you know, as people keep commenting, I'm sort of, this conversation's not particularly satisfying for me in some ways, because I'm just not hearing some things that I think, you know, we're suddenly talking about policies and specific policies and really not the core of the matter here. And And I think that that's something that we really need to kind of think about. This is obviously it's not a comfortable conversation, but you know, there's systemic issues, there's systemic problems, and you know, what are just even a few simple things that we could advocate for that are so obvious, you know, whether it's education, which is something that is so important. We have the potential of 2 new schools in our community. You know, is there something there that we can really advocate for that's very specific that's going on in our community? Is there examples of maybe supporting other different types of community engagement on the police department? But even those are specific policies. But this isn't very satisfying, and I don't know how to move that along. And so I'm just saying that that's sort of my conversation. You know, it's like I'm just seeing that Janet had just put in, you know, with the legislation on 50A. I mean, I think that that's, you know, a policy, but what are some values? I mean, is there something there? I'm just there's something that's missing here, and I don't know what it is. And, you know, I just wonder, like, what are the values of the individuals in the city? I think that William brought up a really great point about being able to, you know, participate and bear witness to something that some of us have had an opportunity to do before in the city. But this is not the first time, it's not the last time that people will come together, but how do we take something and, you know, I don't know, it's just statements, you know, are statements, but is there anything else that we can do? So just throw that out there. I'll just go back to, let's see, I guess Chenault, you had your hand up.
I'm sorry, I cut the camera trying to put the to unmute last time. I wanted to be clear that my reference to the Soho Alliance article was the parts that are the narrative about what actually happened and to whom, and the way, particularly in which it affected the residents who live in these same buildings. And that ties in a bit to what our job is, which is serving the residents of the community. And as we do the more you look at things and correction of things, that we focus on the end of how we can help the people we're supposed to help. Thank you.
Thanks, Chenault. Janine, I see that you haven't spoken and you have your hand up.
I just want to jump in and say that there's a lot of things we can do. I mean, I think if we want to have specific recommendations with respect to NYPD, that's probably a public hearing and so forth. But there's a lot that we can do short of that, and in terms of a broad statement. And I think that's important, because opposing police brutality, you know, supporting changes to systemic racism, I don't see that as being particularly controversial. And I do think that there's a lot of we can do on the education side, and that we've been doing that, and we've got a lot on our agenda for our meeting next week.
Okay, thanks. You know, I was going to say, I had this in front of me and I just moved one of my papers, and I just printed out because it's very compelling, sort of village preservation, or the GBSHP sent out an email like earlier today, just talking about the history of African Americans in Greenwich Village. And I just say that because it's something that I know, but I hadn't really thought about just until seeing that. I've had so many different things going on. And it really, in their email, they really raised the spirit of our, particularly, you know, the East and West Village, Greenwich Village, the spirit and ethos of our own community. And I just, you know, thinking that maybe that's something that we can think about this with a little bit of that in mind. A lot of the past leaders that have, that have been in this community for centuries. I mean, it's nothing new. So I'm just looking at the list. Mar?
Hey. So I'm a little disheartened by some of the things I've heard today and the continued reference to this article. I admit I haven't finished it, but even just the title, I really feel is focusing on the wrong thing. As many of you know, I'm born and raised here on Bank Street in the West Village. This is my neighborhood. So there was a question, somebody asked, do you go to the community meetings? And, some people are like, I go, I've never gone, da da da. I go to them, but I don't go to them for the same reason you go to them. I go to those meetings so that those police see my face, see my family, get to know us, and no longer see us as a threat. I don't feel safe when I see police. I feel afraid. And that's the difference. Defunding the police, the PBA, there is a climate in this country right now. No. Can we live without police? No, absolutely not. But we need to redistribute the funds. We need to reevaluate our priorities as people. As far as the school, getting the cops out of the schools argument, what we're talking about now is either retraining the cops from enforcement to restorative justice, right? So retraining, redistributing. Let's shift what's wrong. Let's just address it. As far as the damage and the buildings, they can be fixed. They're gonna live. But the bigger issue is the continuous murder, sanctioned legal murder of Black people in this country. Black people like me, Black people like my daughter. And mind you, I'm not against police. My whole family in Ireland are cops, long line of Garda. My great-great-grandfather was a deputy sheriff in Tennessee. Of course, he then was lynched for his trouble. But I just want you guys to have some perspective. I've written down everything that all of you said, and for every comment that's been made, Matt, you were great. You cry. I cry every single day. I cried today. Just because one person, I said, maybe that wasn't the nicest thing to say, because what they said was totally inappropriate. And they screamed me down, and how dare I? How dare I? And this happens every day. So I need you guys to have some perspective on this and try to walk in someone else's shoes. So, that's all. We're doing the work over at Schools and Ed. And, I'm also available to talk to any of you at any time at great lengths about this. All right, that's all.
Thank you, Mar. I think that I had already called on you, Coral, right? So, Chenault, did I go back to you? I think I. Chenault.
I didn't lower my hand. I'm finished. Thanks.
Okay. Susan? Susan Wittenberg?
Here I got it. I just wanted to share one experience I had with our local police, and thank you, Mark. I feel like I knew our police very well from my neighborhood because we have so much police presence. And, I thought that then the day after the first night of looting, maybe I guess that was Sunday morning, I was talking to one of the police on the corner who I've seen many times, and it was a really shocking experience because they were upset by the looting and they said, well, we're not being allowed to do our job. And that was something that was very disturbing to me, that they were so honest in saying that, which really meant that our good relationship with our police and thinking that we understand them, we know them very well because of all the community outreach, actually was not as accurate as our experiences. Because here's someone who's been on my block forever, you know, who I say hello to. And now, you know, when that happened, they were saying they wanted the opportunity to be tougher and to come in and use force that the community doesn't want. And so I wanted to share that because I felt like we have a sort of civil relationship because they come to our meetings all the time. They, you know, community outreach and monthly meetings. But this was something that I felt like, who are you? You know, don't you know what this community really wants and who we are? And so that was very disturbing. And I agree that we're starting from a harder point than I would have thought we were before this happened in Soho. And that was, you know, very disturbing.
Thanks, Susan. Matt?
Hey, so I think Janet stole the words out of my mouth with her prior comment and a number of the other comments. So one, I will say, I don't think I'm a new activist. I'm just new to you guys. Two, I think it would be an incredibly powerful statement for the community, for the overwhelmingly white, overwhelmingly wealthy and relative to New York City terms community board to come out and say, yeah, a bunch of windows got broken. It was earnestly scary. It pales in comparison, and it does in comparison to the fear experienced day in and day out by people of color in our community and communities across the country. There is a reason that property damage laws are not written into the Constitution. Equal protection under the law is. There's a reason why I don't care about insurance companies. I mean, I earnestly care about people, individual human beings who were scared during it. I do, of course. I want to take away fear. I want to take away pain. I care about the small, so if a small business chose to not have insurance that covered protests in New York City, that was an economic decision that they made. And I'm in finance. You decide what you decide in terms of insurance. The insurance companies, I don't really care about. I mean, we're not talking billions of dollars of damage. These are relatively minor issues in the scheme of what we are discussing. And so I think more than a cursory discussion, we can talk about it later. There's nothing stopping us talking about the looting later. But anything more than a cursory discussion about the property damage. If anybody was assaulted, let me know. But about the property damage, it is inappropriate. We're talking about people. These are extrajudicial killings by the state. That is what happens in Central America. That is what happens elsewhere. Apparently, it happens here. And not apparently, we all knew. We all knew. This isn't new. This is the state murdering its citizens without due process. You want to talk to me about windows? Thank you.
I just wanted to throw in, one of the things that I just had my notes in front of me, just, while since George Floyd was killed, clearly we've had a conversation in front of us, but let's just not forget that going through COVID really impacted our Black and brown communities in New York City in a very disproportionate manner. And, I think that we have our experiences from the last 10 days, but if you think about that, and you start thinking about the systemic issues, you know, you have a clearer picture that maybe start thinking about other episodes like that where these issues are just very clear, and maybe that can help us in thinking about these issues and having some different thoughts if we do want to go forward and have whatever it may be. And I had said to somebody earlier today, even if it's a letter to the mayor, you know, I mean, there's lots of different outputs for things, but it's something that I think, you know, as a New Yorker, and it was really very heartening, Chenault, what you had said about, you know, your experience in growing up in the segregated South and coming to New York City and, you know, having a very different experience here. And, you know, the idea here is there hope in moving forward? Is there a different future? And I guess that's, you know, when you look at what happened with COVID, you know, that's brings up together a lot of issues. Then you throw on top of it all the other systemic issues, which were very much highlighted by the murder of George Floyd. And even on that, I think it was the same day, the woman in Central Park, you know, you start piecing together just some very contemporary issues that are all different sides of the same, you know, and that's just something I'm throwing out because there's much larger conversations to be had that aren't just, you know, of the energy of what's at the protests. You know, there's a lot more, and it's emblematic in just so many examples that, you know, we heard, you know, these examples are everywhere in everyday life. But I just wanted to throw that out. Coral?
Yeah, one thing I meant to say earlier was just, I also feel like we do have the American privilege of, yes, we've had a lot of injustices, we have a lot of injustices and we need to fix them. But like my family left Mexico in the 70s because it wasn't like some bad cops, it's like all bad cops. So we do, at least as a country, we do have confidence still that there are some good cops. And in many countries, because we don't have rule of law respected by all, you don't have that deferential. Do you go, you know, I was taught as a young girl not to go to a cop. You did not look the federal police in the eye ever for any reason. So that is something that I think is maybe relates to some instances here, but it is also like, you know, maybe that's made me more of a rule abider because of that experience. And I want to keep that, you know, for people to keep the perspective that, yes, we have a lot of things to fix, but this is the US and it's not, as Matt said, Central American countries. So the reason that isn't the case is because we respect rule of law. That's all.
Hey, Matt, I don't know if I didn't lower your hand before, but I just see your hand.
Mine's not up, sorry.
Okay. Is there anybody else who'd like to make any comments? I know I've been talking to a number of people. Sorry, I see a few more hands. Okay, Patricia.
I was on another Zoom call, but I think I caught a little bit of what you guys were saying. Are you guys opposed to doing a letter, this community board? Did I miss something?
No, we just, we weren't opposed to doing anything. We just didn't have necessarily what is the vehicle of conveyance of whatever it is that we may want to convey, you know, or what, is it a letter to somebody? I had just thrown out there that, you know, a letter to the mayor as far as delivering, you know, as far as dealing with any city issues, I don't know. And so I just put that out there because I think there's a lot of different ideas. And so, and nobody has said they're opposed to a letter. It's more the topics, I guess.
Well, should we do a letter?
But I think that's, we can. Who are you sending the letter to? I mean, I say that not as, you know,
No, I know.
difficult. It's just like, who are we addressing? I think that addressing the mayor in just what's been happening is something, you know, if it's to whom it may concern, I don't know, but the mayor is somebody that seems to have a lot
Carter, listen, at the end of the day, there are several options for letters. We could send it out to the electeds. We could send it out as an open letter to the village newspapers. We can send it out as a collective on our website only. There are lots of options to do that if we feel strongly enough. We don't have to dither around and figure that out. I think we could just do something that's supportive.
Well, I don't think we're dithering. It's a question of, you know, these are all aspects of where are we going towards, and having the conversation, because I would hope that we could have all 50 board members supporting this, and, you know, how we're doing this. And so I think that that's important.
The structure of what the substance is.
Right.
I think that's what you're talking about.
Yeah, and it, you know, of course we can send it to anybody. I just am not sure. It depends on what we're addressing, right? That's what would be to whom it's sent to, or if it's just to our community itself, to members of community board too, which very easily could be.
I think the important thing, if we do issue a letter, I really believe that it should acknowledge what's going on and what's been going on, right? Acknowledgement, validation, and then, you know, an outstretched hand, right? Let's work together to make things better.
I mean, I've gotten a letter from everyone, you know, from Greenwich Village Historic Society to Restoration Hardware practically. I mean, there's no one who isn't writing, you know, a letter condemning police brutality and, you know, years and years of history of racism. I mean, that's pretty straightforward. I think the tricky thing is not to say anything that will divide us.
Right, exactly. That's the point, right? We're talking about unity. We're talking about an outstretched hand. We're talking about healing. And that we're dedicated to that. And let's let our community know. Let's share that with them.
So I think this is becoming a little bit clearer, you know, as we talk about it. So that's I think that message is something obviously a number of you have talked about. I've talked with a number of you about. So in answer to your question, Patricia, that's where we were with the letter. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I was just trying to answer you as to what that discussion was. Did you have anything more that you wanted to add?
Should we start a working group around this?
Oh, you stole my thunder. You wouldn't let me raise my hand. Can I speak?
Oh, sure.
This is,
Okay. I was just letting.
Sorry, Patricia. This is what I've been waiting to hear somebody else say it. So, yeah, I mean, I think a letter is not only too narrow, but I think it will get lost in the shuffle of the restoration hardware and the theaters and all the emails we're getting right now. I think this is a gigantic. I've been listening the whole time because there's just a lot to unpack. And I think one letter also, you know, there's a risk of sort of letting the ball drop. So I think this is something, if we want to keep this, and it's an ever evolving situation, I think it'll be easy to figure out who to send things to if there's a group or an added piece to another already created committee. It'll be more apparent. There's gonna be a lot of new, I don't think this is going away anytime soon. So I think there's always gonna be something to address, I think, on a fairly regular basis, but at least for the foreseeable future. I think a singular letter without some sort of working group or task force or added on component to another committee, if we have to do it that way, but if that makes the most sense. I think we have to commit with that, not just a letter. I think a letter is not enough for this situation.
Well, yeah, I don't think anybody was suggesting it was just a letter. The letter is the beginning point of the conversation.
Right. Well, in order
Inviting
to keep
people,
the
and
conversation going, though, I think.
to Mara's point, it's just the outreach and where.
Yeah, no, I hear that. But then what happens after that? How do you continue the momentum?
That's what, you know, what are the responses we get to a letter is what we want to hear from, to see what those conversations, what people want the conversations to be. And I think
What do you mean?
What the responses, what happens when you reach out your hands to people to have the conversations.
Part of our letter.
I don't know. I just don't think that's enough. I think that's very passive, but that's just my opinion on it.
But a letter could be the first in many. It's saying we're not just here saying something a point in time. This is our first step, and we will continue this process. But it's not just, you know, if we want to stand out and really be heard, we're going to be promoting a series of goals. And it's, you know, it can be a continuing flow of our ideas.
Yeah, I just, you know, right. I just want to bring this back to, you know, as a community board, we generally focus on the issues that are within our community. So the ongoing conversation of what I see, or what can we do in our own community as far as addressing these many different issues, obviously. And that's why I brought up the fact that, you know, even the potential of 2 new schools in our community, you know, how does this fit in? Does that fit into the conversation? How does this fit in to equity across so many different areas, you know? But that's within our community. And that's why I think reaching out to our community to hear some things is important. And that's starting with that to see if this is something, you know, that somebody had mentioned that we addressed in each committee, or is this actually something that's taken out of that and just put on the side? Or is this something that we embrace across the whole board? And so that's why I'm not sure that I see a right answer yet in either of those. And I think it's an interesting point. What was brought up, was that Janet who brought that up, or was that somebody else who, the chat's a little bit small, so I can't quite see it all that well. But I think that's an interesting way of really shifting the dynamic, maybe, you know, across the whole board. And so I just don't know. I mean, I don't know if people have particular thoughts. I mean, this is not something that is going to change in the next few days. But I think it's important of reaching out to have conversations, you know. I mean, that's not satisfying, but without those conversations, you can't really identify things that we might actually be able to have an impact on.
Carter, could I just jump in? I just want to put my voice behind what Mar said and Patricia said. I think it's important to get something out. I would think, and I would not want this to slow down the process. I'm just throwing this out there, you know, as a thought, is that one of the things we could think about is looking internally at how the board does things, how we structure things, how we approach things, and, you know, turn this into some self-reflection. I don't have anything particular in mind, but you know, for it to continue, a lot of things have to be rethought about how they're done. Like I said, I don't want that to hold up the letter, but that's something to consider, that how as we as a community board do our business, how do we interact with the community, et cetera.
I'd like to just jump in that the only thing that we shouldn't do is nothing. So right. Let's write a letter, let's write a statement, and then let's figure out the next steps.
Yeah, so you know, I've been speaking with a number of you who are interested in doing this, so maybe that's something that we can do in the next week, and we can talk about, and then we can bring it back to the executive committee next week and discuss it some more, and then bring it to the full board to vote on and send it. I mean, I think that you know, I think it's important for the full board to be behind this. I mean, I think that's fairly it's something I've discussed with a number of you, but it's, I think as far as how we as a board deal with it, I think that that's something that we need to think about, if this is something that we separate out or if it's something that we integrate into every single committee. And that's something that I think we need to talk about a little bit more, and just, I'd be curious to hear more response, talk to board members about this, during the next week. So if anybody has any thoughts, certainly reach out to me. But this is definitely something I think we can continue the discussion at next week's executive, and then have something that we can bring forward at the full board. Does that sound like the
Carter? Can I just mention? Can I advocate that we pass and at least, so obviously there's short term, which is what are we doing immediately? And I'm sorry, I missed my first point. Patricia wasn't done with her statement, and so I'm going to yield my time for the moment to Patricia and then follow up.
Yes, Patricia.
No, I was saying that we probably should just, after we do the letter, get something out. Doing nothing just says we don't care, or we don't have a voice or a point on it. Right. And then maybe continue the conversations, reaching out a hand to see what other people are doing or saying. That's my point. That's what I was trying to say.
Well, you did say that CB4 has a working group to examine racism in their CB.
Yeah.
That's a start. Ways we can support minority-owned businesses. That's a start.
Could I just suggest something really strange over here? Like, how about asking our African-American board members to take leadership on this?
That would make sense, wouldn't it?
It might, yeah.
Crickets.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's been some of the conversations that I've had, but the question is in moving forward is we got to start the first step, right? And the first step, to Patricia's point, is not being silent. And if we're going to move forward with saying something, a part of the process of creating that, I think it will become self-evident the steps that we should be taking. Oftentimes when you start working on something, it becomes very clear what we should be doing. And I think that if we're reaching out a hand and just even working on that language, it will become clear when we're asking people what it is that we should be doing. And I think that, like many of the Manhattan community boards, we're a very privileged board, and figuring out a good way of doing that and approaching it. Absolutely, I agree. Statement of having any African Americans on our board, who I know I've spoken to some of you. I haven't directly asked you if you wanted to participate in any type of a working group or anything, but is that the way we want to approach this? And as everybody knows, I'm very open to discussing all the different ways. I'm a little hesitant to jump right in without seeing if this is what becomes clear as the right way of doing it. And that's why I think that working on a letter is really, it will become self-evident what the right way to go is. And if we want a specific committee, if we want a specific working group, if we want to spread this out amongst all of our working groups, if we want to add this to a permanent committee as a part of its umbrella, there's a lot of different ways to move forward, and they all have positives and negatives as opposed to approaching those over the long term.
We actually don't have a committee that really addresses this.
We don't, but it's,
but like, rather than a working group, a committee.
Well, in the past, the social services, I think, had been LGBTQ, for example, and then there were less and less issues, and so that was separated out. It used to be a standalone committee. There have been different committees over the years, that sort of ebb and flow with the different issues in our community. And I would think that, at this point, there's certainly, it could be very much a standalone committee, but at the same time, you know, is it something that fits in across some of the other issues that we're talking about that are systemic, and should it be a part of any of the other committees that are regularly dealing with?
I have a suggestion.
Sure.
That there be a special committee or working group or whatever the appropriate thing is to deal with the very special nature of this, and that it that you appoint wisely a variety of people from a variety of interests, and that it include at least one member from each of the constituent committees, if you will, that would have an interest in one or another way.
That's definitely one way.
That's the motion if you're looking for one.
Right. I know that's definitely that. That's even another way on top of the different ideas. So, I mean, you know, I think that I'd like to talk to a number of people over the next, you know, week. Think about that, and also just think about putting together. I know there are a few people already interested in this and putting together something to bring back to the executive committee next week. Have a little clearer picture on a good path forward. I think that thinking about you know, anytime putting together a working group or a special task force, that it's better to think of its longer course of action. If there's a working group is not a forever group. It has a, you know, ideally a beginning, middle, end. You may not necessarily know the timing, but I'm not sure that that's why I think that this is maybe something that's more of a permanent committee, but it's something I'd like to discuss with some different people and sort of think about that. You know, unfortunately, this is an issue that comes up over and over again over the course of my life and everybody else here, and we find ourselves back at this point, and it doesn't seem to be that anybody is satisfied with the change. So I'd like to at least see on the board that we can take this in a way that really does change the way that we do things. And so that's definitely a challenge, you know, as everybody here knows. I see, Valerie, you have your hand up, and Donna.
Yeah, really quickly. I agree with the, you know, the working group and around this topic, but I think, and I agree that the short term is the letter, and then the long term is the process, right? And with to Chenault's comments, but I believe that we will fail unless unless that working group infiltrates into the committees, because otherwise real change is not going to happen. It's just going to be a surface level thing, when I really believe in the leadership of who I think would be leading this working group, that it's really got to infiltrate in our committees, and it's got to be longer lasting. Who are we identifying as like next and upcoming talent to take over for different committee chairs, and what does that look like, and all the terms of different types of diversity that I mentioned earlier, especially with term limits. So I think that working group has got to work its way into each single committee and each single working group. What does this mean for anything dealing with the reopening? I would love to partner and find out what our short-term group can do to help in the long term. Thank you.
Thanks. Donna?
I just want basically say exactly what Valerie just said, and ditto. I think we need to get a letter out. I think it's very important that our community board does something, because I think to be silent is saying something that we don't want to say. I think we should be getting something out sooner rather than later. And then whether it's a working group or a committee, it should be long-term. It should be an overlay to, as Valerie just said, every committee we have, so that we're checking all the time. It's in back of mind all the time when we're doing things. Are we doing right? Are we doing all that we could be doing with this?
Great, thanks. And Matt?
So the 3 quick points. The first one is I don't love the idea of a letter. The deliberative bodies don't use letters. They have resolutions. So the executive can send a letter, the chair could send a letter, but the only mechanism for community board 2 to have a voice is a resolution. The second is if and this is a truth that I have been loath to admit for a very long time, if I am in an EMS agency and there are a couple people in that EMS agency who deliberately withhold pain medication to African Americans and I don't speak up, I'm a bad EMT. And so I think we need to stop talking about good cops versus bad cops. I'm friends with both of them. On the side, they're good people. You know, they're fine. They're nice to you, whatever. Individually, people are incredibly nice often. It's what we've found in history. It's when they get into collectives that we start to have an issue. And then the third is we're talking about a lot of different ways to do things. And the answer is yes. These are not binary choices. It's not, do we have, you know, and I think everybody's agreed, do we have a resolution? Do we have a working group that talks about short, medium, and long-term goals? Do we have one committee working on it? Do we have all of the committees working on it? Yes, is the short answer. There is no reason that we can't chew bubblegum and walk at the same time. We can do all of this. It is going to be hard. It is going to be uncomfortable. But I think unless we look at every single angle, we're not going to do a good job. The only word of caution I'll give is that I don't think we should get too bogged up just at this meeting about whether it's a working group, whether it's a committee. Somebody asked in the chat, what's the goal? The goal for me is to have a bunch of people, at least in theory, agree on the idea of sending a strongly worded resolution that does take a stand, that says this is anathema to our ideals, if not our reality.
Coral?
Yeah, I was thinking in the interest of moving this all forward, maybe we could ask all board members to submit like 3 bullet points that they think are the 3 most important things that we need to include in any message, statement, whatever we do, and send those to either you or Bob or whoever you designate, so we can try and see where there's already agreement before the next meeting. I mean, I think there's obviously broad agreement, but it might actually be more clearly addressed. And then that puts it on all 50 of us to do some thinking about what is the most important thing to say right now. And to do it in a way that could actually possibly bring consensus faster. That's just a suggestion. And then another idea, so I haven't seen the news. Somebody sent me that Dallas today adopted duty to intervene. So a cop can't stand by. And I think that's pretty awesome, actually. You know, you cannot say that they were senior, I thought I was doing my job, I was following order. You can't do that. You have to intervene if you think something is wrong. That's something to consider.
Okay, Susan?
I said, and I agree that every imaginable group is writing letters now. But one thing that sets our community board apart from other areas, even other areas that have been looting, is that Soho, our tiny neighborhood Soho, is so symbolic of the ultimate wealth brands that we can't address what was underneath the looting. And that's something that is challenging for us to discuss. And I'm speaking as someone who lived directly in it for those days, but I feel like that's a tough one. And, you know, I've heard people, we can go back to Sean's letter, although I don't want to, but this is a hard issue, but I think that we really have to talk about that because it has to do with a lot of what became in our neighborhood and where our neighborhood is heading. And this is, you know, a very big thing in our community board that isn't even going to be in anybody else's letters. Everybody else's letters can sing the realities of systemic racism and the national issues that we're all facing together. But we have to do with wealth disparity that was part of why Soho was so symbolic at that time. And now's not the moment to give that a lot of thought, but I just don't want to gloss over that in if we are going to really dig in and think about it. I think that has to be thought about as well.
Okay, thanks. Do we have any more comments? More thoughts? I did like the idea of sending in bullet points, even though I really don't like thinking about this as bullet points. It's a little kind of not exactly the way I want to think about things, but I do think it's a good idea if people want to send in what their concerns are, and and certainly you don't have to limit it to 3, just to have a sense of that. I think that's a great idea for everybody who's been on the call or been on the meeting today. So I think that we have an idea of the clear direction for next week and a lot of thoughts on going forward from there, which I think that will become clear this week. So I think that that's, I don't see anybody else has anything else to say. It's certainly given me a lot to think about, from the board's perspective. And if you guys have more thoughts, do feel free to call me or send me an emails about it. There's a lot of different ways to do this. And I really like the idea, of how do we impact the whole board on a long-term basis. And that's really the, having a working group that doesn't integrate with the rest of the board and the rest of its function isn't a way that we will be as successful in getting change. So we really need to think about a way that we can really have this reach out into all areas of the board in order to move forward and do things better. I mean, there's always lots of room to improve. And I think that's all, something that we should be striving for, and all the positive messages that we're hearing out on the streets and that people are talking about, amongst themselves. So just thank you for everybody. Sorry we were a few minutes late starting. I won't schedule any meetings before next week's executive session so that we start on time. Does anybody have any last comments? No.
Okay. Thank you, Carter. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye. This is Ed Ma. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Hi, thanks.
Thanks, bye.
Bye.
哎呀，哇，好不错了，我没想，但是这是给我吃的，啊，谢谢谢谢。完了，完了，完了。谢谢。我放的关系。